Good morning.
Good morning.
A little tricky. Well, we're getting close to Easter, so I thought I would have an Easter-themed sermon today. It's by Lewis Walton. He's a Seventh-day Adventist attorney. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he's led quite an interesting life. I think he was in the military for a while, and he was in the CIA for a while, and being an attorney. He's a very sharp person, so this is a sermon that he has given. It says, today we are going back to relive the events of Christ's life and death, and then hopefully see that there are great lessons for people living in the dimming shadows of Earth's history. Let's go back, if we can, to about 11 p.m. on a Thursday evening in the year AD 31. There's a full moon over the Mount of Olives, and it washes that whole valley in a silvery light. And somewhere in the city, the Savior and his disciples find their way down out of the upper room and out and into that maze called the streets of Jerusalem. And there, just a few hundred yards east of the wall of Jerusalem, is a garden. And its location and its use are such a well-kept secret that for 3.5 years, the leaders of Israel have been unable to locate that as the place where Christ goes for his private devotion and many times his evening rest. And they would not find it tonight except for the presence of a traitor. And so, along toward midnight, the Lord is there in the garden, and he sees the flicker of torchlight and hears the muffled sound of the mob coming through one of the gates. Jesus has been praying in the garden, not in the relaxed pose with robes beautifully laid out as we see in the paintings. He is in agony. He is clawing at the air. This is life or death. In the New English Bible, it says that he says to his disciples, "My heart is breaking with grief." Jesus sees the mob, and he gets up and he goes out to meet the enemy. And he says, "Whom seek ye?" Now in Ephesians, we are told what the armor is that the Christian has. The breastplate of righteousness, the feet shod with the gospel of peace, truth about your loins, the helmet of salvation, the shield of faith. But notice something interesting. There is no armor on the back. And Christians never turn their backs on the enemy. They always go to meet the enemy the way David did Goliath. There's a brief one-sided fight where there is an ear-ectomy. There is a miracle performed, and then the disciples scattered to the wind, and Jesus was led away. He is now in the custody of a Praetorian cohort and the temple police, and he begins to encounter a legal system which he himself designed, and which for 1,000 years has seemed to exist for the single purpose of saving life and showing mercy. Hebrew criminal law. It is the most astonishing, mercy-oriented law that has ever come down in the history of the world. It was so protective of the criminal defendant that it is a wonder that they ever got convicted of anything. In the system, there is no such thing as a professional prosecutor. He doesn't exist. There is no word in their language for it. If you, as an Israelite, wish to bring a criminal charge against another person, you, as the witness, will have to serve as the prosecutor. That job becomes yours. And it's a lot easier to say than it is to do, for the simple reason that you will appear before the great Sanhedrin. All 71 of the top Jewish lawyers in the nation. And their function is to act not only as judge, but as defense attorney for the accused. There are no lawyers better in the world today than Jewish lawyers. If you choose to become a witness in that day, you will, before you enter the hall of hewn stone, be given a stern warning, among which is the reminder that if you perjure yourself and are convicted of lying in the court, the penalty you sought to impose against your fellow Israelite will be turned around right on you. In other words, on the night of Jesus' trial, the proper Jewish penalty for perjury was crucifixion. Another reason you might not be too anxious to be a prosecuting witness in a Jewish trial was this: as there were no prosecuting attorneys, neither were there any executioners. They didn't exist. There was no paid office of executioner in Israel. The complaining, successful prosecuting witness had to turn around and become the executioner. Let me give you a little feel for how seriously the Sanhedrin took the idea that it was their job to provide any possible defense. After the testimony, during the deliberation, the 71 members would each rise, the most junior member first, and state his position as to whether he thought the defendant was guilty or innocent. The youngest member voted first for the simple reason they wanted to eliminate any possibility that the younger members might be influenced by what the older members said. The most junior member spoke up first, and then up, all the way to the high priest. All 71 had to speak. Now, in the course of a Jewish trial, if it came about that there was a verdict of guilty and the defendant was condemned to death, there was a process in which the court went through agony trying to reverse itself and save a Hebrew life. Another procedure was that they could not have a trial at night. The Sanhedrin sat from the close of the morning sacrifice until the time of the evening sacrifice. There was no other legal time for the Sanhedrin to hear a capital case. Why? Because the Sanhedrin is the Jewish spiritual leadership of the country, and you don't begin a capital case without an act of worship, which is the morning sacrifice. Anything beyond that is outside the jurisdiction of the court, and any lawyer will tell you that a court without jurisdiction cannot render judgment. The system was so protective of the criminal defendant that if execution actually occurred, the first act after the death of the accused was for the relatives of the executed person to pay a call on the judges who had condemned that person to death, a courtesy call in which they said, "We recognize you could not have been more fair. You are God-fearing sons of Israel, and you did nothing more than your duty." The Sanhedrin sat in a semicircle with the high priest out in the center, and there were 3 court reporters. In this country, we have 1, but they had 3. They felt human life was too precious. We would never take the chance of one individual missing the count. And so they had 3 scribes. The scribe on the right of the priest recorded votes for acquittal. The scribe on the left recorded votes for condemnation. And the one in the middle added them both up and checked to make sure they were right. So when Jesus, the Son of God, rises to the right hand of God, what does it mean? It means he's voting for our acquittal, voting for us, and there is the certainty of our salvation. Caiaphas was he who gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die for the people. In other words, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has already made up his mind. This is no trial. This is a farce. It was a principle of Jewish law, as it is in ours. If you have anything against the accused, you disqualify yourself from sitting in judgment on that person. And so here we have a court in which the high priest has already made up his mind. This Sanhedrin, which has these rules that I've just given you, that are supposed to guarantee the innocence of the accused, if there is any defect at all in trial procedure, has 3 times met and plotted how to take the life of the Son of God. Now, I submit to you, the Son of God stands before this semicircular tribunal with its 3 scribes sitting there solemnly going through a charade of justice in front of a court where the conviction is already determined. And now all that is needed is to draw the witnesses in and hopefully make it quick and clean and get the job done. Now the witnesses in a capital case were sequestered outside the main courtroom. As they were brought in, they were asked the following: the extent of which you are about to testify, I ask you the following. Was it during a year of Jubilee? Was it in an ordinary year? In what month? At what hour? In what place? Do you identify this person? And one after one, the witnesses came through and answered those questions. Now in Mark 14:55 it says, and the chief priests and the council sought for witnesses against Christ to put him to death, and found none. For many bare false witness against him, but their witness agreed not together. Now why was that? You might say, couldn't one hear what the other said and then repeat the story? No. Why? Because Jewish law required that all witnesses be excluded from the courtroom. The witness testifying would be the only one in the room. When he was done, he would leave and they'd bring in the next one. They are trying to make this thing look like a trial, and one by one, the witnesses come in and they fumble the ball. And their witnesses agreed not together. Now, Caiaphas is getting in trouble. At this point, the trial is crumbling in his hands like sand. The big guy is in trouble, and he is mismanaging the trial, and nothing is coming of it, and the ultimate nightmare for him is about to happen. This defendant is going to walk out of there. It's res judicata. He'll walk right out of here, and there's no bringing him back. No 2 witnesses agreed with each other in their testimony. In Jewish law, if 2 witnesses' testimony conflicted on material evidence, it was the duty of the high priest to say, acquittal. This is a mistrial. The prisoner goes free. Why? For the simple reason that the Jews very sensibly said, only the mind of God can probe into the mind of man and determine who is telling the truth. And so, when there is a conflict of evidence, the Jewish court did not try to do what we do. We sit there day after day, hearing testimony, trying to determine who is telling the truth. The Jews said, we don't care who is telling the truth. There is a conflict of evidence, and when that occurs, the defendant goes free. It's that serious in their system. No human had the ability to tell who was telling the truth. Now the problem Caiaphas is having is that he has to have at least 2 witnesses who saw the whole thing and say the same thing. The Jewish system did not have what we have in this country, and that is a thing called a chain of evidence. In our system, witness A could come in and say, I saw the defendant get into the car. Witness B could say, I saw the defendant drive the car away. Witness C could say, I saw the defendant get out of the car 8 blocks away, and you've got it, grand theft auto. You have a chain of evidence. All you have to do is have witnesses whose testimony links one with the next. In the Jewish system, it did not work that way. Take the crime of kidnapping, as in Joseph's case. You had 2 elements, abducting and selling. If witness A said, I saw the defendant abduct the person, and witness B said, I saw the defendant sell that person, could you get a conviction? No, because both witnesses had to see both the abduction and the selling. If you're going to testify, you had to see the whole thing, and your testimony had to agree in every material detail with witness B. And this is the problem Caiaphas is up against. There was no such thing as circumstantial evidence in their system. You either saw it or you didn't, but you never inferred guilt. Caiaphas is desperate, and he tries something. He stands up. The only hope he has is to pry the convicting evidence out of the defendant. He has several witnesses who have said something about Jesus saying that he would destroy the temple, but he doesn't have two that agree. Now, if he can trick Jesus into saying something that sounds like he is agreeing with one of the witnesses, he's got two, and he's got a conviction. How did Jesus handle that? The most brilliant argument in the world is absolute silence. Jesus stood back, and the high priest fell on his face with a thud. The priest said, "Answerest thou nothing? What is it that these witnesses hold against thee?" But Jesus held his peace and answered nothing. There's one thing left for Caiaphas to do. He now does something that is contrary to Jewish law. He changes the theory or the charge of the trial midstream. The theory of the indictment was that Jesus had operated seditiously, that he had threatened some destructive act against the temple. Now, he changed the theory, and he invokes a new novel theory of prosecution called blasphemy. He says something that Jesus cannot ignore. "I adjure thee by the living God that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God." And the next thing we hear is an answer from Jesus, and then the sound of elegant fabric ripping. Jesus said, "I am, and ye shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power." The right hand of power. Once again, Jesus is now the scribe for the defense. He is your certainty of salvation. Then the high priest rent his robes and said, "What need we of any further witnesses? Ye have heard the blasphemy. What think ye?" And they all condemned him to be guilty of death. Three procedural defects in what Caiaphas did. Number one, the high priest could never become the prosecutor. Number two, he changed the charge or the theory of the trial midstream. Number three, he said, "What need we of further witnesses?" Jesus is going to go to his death based on only one bit of evidence, and that is his uncorroborated confession. Can a criminal confess and be found guilty in the American system? You bet. But in the Jewish system, an uncorroborated confession is of no use. It required two or more witnesses to agree for a conviction. Caiaphas said, "Ye have heard the blasphemy. What think ye?" And they all condemned him to death. Now, Nicodemus and Joseph apparently were not at this session of the court. So this meant probably 69 Jewish lawyers on the high court, after hearing Jesus' supposed confession, said, "We believe him to be guilty of death." Do you know what's wrong with this under Jewish law? It is the strangest principle of law you'll ever encounter, completely different from ours. In the Jewish system, if a criminal were unanimously convicted, he was automatically acquitted. The theory was that no 71 people anywhere will ever agree on anything. You can't get 71 people to agree on anything. So it was in Jewish law that if all 71 of the Sanhedrin immediately and unanimously agreed that the individual was guilty, that shows a mob spirit. The prisoner has no friend at the court. Does that sound like God's system of justice, a friend at court? In the Jewish system, no single person on the Sanhedrin could speak against the accused until someone had spoken up in his favor. That's how careful they were about justice. So when they all condemned them by their vote, that tells us once again that Jesus had the right to walk right out of there and never be troubled again. There were grounds for immediate acquittal, but it didn't work that way, did it? If you read the Gospels, you will find there was a second trial at sunrise. Now why? Under Jewish law, you could never sentence a prisoner to be executed on the same day as the evidence was taken. The theory behind that was, give us a little time to think this over. They could never reverse their vote for acquittal, but they could reverse their vote for conviction, thus giving the prisoner a second chance, and again, they could hear witnesses. Now we'll pick up the story of Judas. And when morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against him to put him to death. When Judas, who had betrayed them, saw that he was condemned, repented himself, brought again the 30 pieces of silver, and said, I have sinned in that I have betrayed innocent blood. Now Judas was probably the brightest of the 12, and he probably knew more about Jewish law than the others put together. He recognizes, I have a chance to save Jesus. They have to go back for a rehearing, and at that point, they have to hear witnesses, and I will come in and intervene. I will confess, and they will not be able to condemn him. That could be why he comes in at this point. Judas said, I have sinned and betrayed innocent blood, and the reply of the elite Jewish lawyers was, what is that to us? See thou to that. This is evidence that this whole thing is a farce, and they said, what is that to us? The Sanhedrin had convicted the Lord of creation by bending every known rule of Jewish procedural law. What evidence should they have heard? That the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, Micah 5:2. That he would be born of a virgin, Isaiah 8:14. Jeremiah 23:5 said he would come from the house of David. Malachi 3 said, before he comes, a forerunner like Elijah would announce his coming. Psalms 41:9 talked about his being betrayed for 30 pieces of silver by a disciple. Isaiah 53:4 told of a suffering Messiah, and Jesus' response to all this travesty of justice was simply, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, what does this have to do with us today? What does this have to do with the remnant? Revelation talks about patient saints. It talks about people in Revelation 13 where if you do not go along, there is ultimately not only economic constraint, but the threat of death itself. It talks about a worldwide collapse of justice and the kind of travesty we have just heard about today. Here are they who have the commandments, faith, and spirit of prophecy. Here are they who have the faith of Jesus. May I suggest that for Earth's last generation, whenever or however that occurs, it will take the faith and character of Jesus in order to see justice that badly trampled and keep your cool. At the end of time, you will need that kind of character to look at gross injustice and with the Son of God say, Father, forgive them. They're dying and they don't even know it.
Amen.